I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 28 years old, standing in courtroom 307 with sweaty palms and a racing heart. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, sit on the opposite side, rolling their eyes as I place my briefcase on the table. They've underestimated me my whole life, even after I graduated law school against their wishes. Today we're battling over Grandma Ruth's vacation home, a family inheritance they never expected her to leave to me. Their high-powered attorney smirks confidently, but Judge Harper's eyes widen with surprise as she reviews my credentials. I can feel the weight of today's decision already. Before I continue my story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join me on this journey of standing up for yourself when no one else will. I grew up in Brookline, an affluent Boston suburb where success had a very specific definition. In my parents' world, it meant Ivy League education, prestigious career, strategic marriage, and maintaining certain social connections. Our Tudor-style home with its manicured lawn and pristine interior was the perfect backdrop for the perfect family they thought they were creating. My father, Richard Mitchell, built his reputation as one of Boston's most ruthless corporate attorneys. His clients were Fortune 500 companies, and his specialty was helping them navigate regulations with minimal compliance costs. Mother, Eleanor, the former Miss Massachusetts finalist, had seamlessly transitioned from beauty queen to socialite, serving on charity boards and hosting fundraisers where the guest list was as carefully curated as the menu. From an early age, I knew I didn't fit their mold. When I won the 5th grade science fair with a project on environmental law, they smiled politely, but later questioned why I couldn't have chosen something more feminine. My fascination with debate club and mock trial in middle school was tolerated but not celebrated. It's a phase, they'd tell their friends. She'll grow out of it. My sister Stephanie, 2 years older, was everything I wasn't, naturally inclined toward their version of success. She played the cello beautifully, maintained a perfect GPA without seeming to try too hard, and dated only boys from good families. When she was accepted to Yale, my parents threw a party that was featured in the local society pages. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother Ruth. Dad's mother had been a trailblazer in her own right, one of the few women in her law school class back in the 1960s. She practiced family law until retirement, focusing on cases involving children's rights. During summer visits to her Cape Cod home, we'd sit on the wraparound porch watching the sunset while she told me stories about her cases. "The law isn't just about precedent, Cassandra," she'd say, her voice strong despite her advancing age. "It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." By high school, I'd learned that rebellion didn't have to mean pink hair and sneaking out at night. My form of teenage rebellion was academic excellence directed toward my own goals rather than my parents'. When the guidance counselor called home to suggest I consider a pre-law track given my aptitudes, my father laughed it off. The legal world would eat her alive, he told the counselor, not realizing I was sitting right outside the office door. "She's too sensitive, too idealistic." That night, I made a promise to myself that I'd prove him wrong. When college application season arrived, my parents handed me a list of appropriate choices, all private, all expensive, all with strong connections to their alma maters. I applied to every one, plus the state university that had an exceptional pre-law program and merit scholarships. The day I announced I would be attending State University instead of Cornell, my mother actually dropped her teacup. The fine-bone china shattered on our marble floor, a perfect metaphor for their broken expectations. "We won't pay for that," my father said flatly. "I don't need you to," I replied, sliding the merit scholarship letter across the table. "I've got this covered." Those 4 years of undergrad were transformative. I worked part-time at a local law firm filing paperwork and answering phones while maintaining my GPA. Every summer I interned at different legal aid clinics rather than coming home. The distance between my parents and me grew, but my relationship with Grandma Ruth deepened. She sent care packages with handwritten notes of encouragement and occasionally slipped me checks that I reluctantly cashed when textbook costs exceeded my budget. Law school was another battle. When I was accepted to my father's alma mater, he suddenly offered to pay my tuition. It's time to get serious, he said. Mitchell and Associates could use another Mitchell someday. But the strings attached to that money were visible from space. I opted instead for a public law school with a strong clinical program in family advocacy. I graduated with honors despite minimal support from my parents, who attended my graduation ceremony with expressions that looked more pained than proud. My first job was at Goldstein and Baxter, a small firm specializing in family law. The starting salary was modest compared to what my father's associates made, but the work was meaningful. I helped families navigate divorces with minimal trauma to their children, advocated for foster care reform, and occasionally took on pro bono cases for domestic violence survivors. Meanwhile, Grandma Ruth was growing older. At 87, she still lived independently in the Cape Cod house that had been my sanctuary. We spoke weekly, and I visited at least once a month. She followed my cases with interest, offering insights from her decades of experience. "I'm proud of you," she told me during my last visit, her hand squeezing mine with surprising strength. "You've chosen a harder path, but it's the right one for you." 6 months ago, Grandma Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep. The loss hit me harder than I was prepared for. She'd been my champion, my confidant, the family member who truly understood me. What I didn't expect was how her passing would reignite old family tensions and create entirely new ones. The reading of Grandma Ruth's will was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at her attorney's office in downtown Boston. I took the day off work, dressed in a conservative navy suit, and arrived 15 minutes early. My parents and Stephanie were already there, clustered together in the waiting area. My father checked his Rolex impatiently while my mother thumbed through a magazine without really seeing it. "Cassandra," my mother acknowledged with a cool nod. She looked impeccable as always in her St. John knit suit, not a silver hair out of place. "Sorry for your loss," I offered, the formality feeling strange, but necessary given our strained relationship. Mr. Abernathy, Grandma Ruth's attorney for over 30 years, ushered us into a conference room with dark wood paneling and leather chairs that had seen better days. The contrast between this office and my father's sleek downtown firm couldn't have been more striking. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Abernathy began, adjusting his reading glasses. Ruth was very specific about her wishes, and she updated her will just 8 months ago. I listened as he outlined the standard provisions. Family heirlooms were distributed among various cousins. Stephanie received Grandma's jewelry collection and art pieces. My parents were bequeathed her investment portfolio. Then Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "And to my granddaughter Cassandra Mitchell, I leave my house and property at 142 Shoreline Drive, Cape Cod, along with all its contents and furnishings." The silence that followed was deafening. The vacation home, a sprawling 4-bedroom Cape Codder on 2 acres of beachfront property, was worth well over $1 million in today's market. My father recovered first. "There must be some mistake," he said, voice tight with control. "No mistake," Mr. Abernathy replied, sliding a document across the table. Ruth was very clear about this bequest. "She must have been confused," my mother interjected. She was 87, after all. "She was of completely sound mind," the attorney countered. "I personally verified her cognitive capacity, as did her physician." My father's face flushed dark red. "This is completely inappropriate," he snapped, looking at me with naked accusation. "What did you say to her? How long have you been working this angle?" The insinuation felt like a physical blow. "I didn't work anything," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Grandma Ruth made her own decisions." "You've always been jealous of what your sister and we have," my mother said coldly. "I never thought you'd stoop to manipulating an elderly woman to get what you want." Stephanie at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe we should." "We'll contest this," my father interrupted, already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Wellington right now." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat again. "Before you do that," he said, "Ruth asked me to provide this letter to the family if there were concerns about her decisions." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandma's familiar slanted script. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read aloud. "My dearest Cassandra, if this letter is being read, it means my final wishes have been met with resistance. I am of sound mind and body as I write this, and my decision comes after much thought. You have shown integrity and determination in forging your own path despite tremendous pressure. The Cape House has always been your sanctuary, the place where you felt most yourself. I want you to have it, not just as a material possession, but as a reminder that choosing your own path takes courage. To Richard and Eleanor, I love you both, but I have watched with growing sadness as you failed to appreciate the remarkable young woman your daughter has become. Material success isn't the only measure of a life well lived. I hope someday you'll understand that. All my love, Grandma Ruth. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. The room fell silent again, but my father was already texting furiously. This changes nothing, he said flatly. We'll be contesting the will. 3 days later, I received an email from Thomas Wellington, my father's colleague and one of the most aggressive attorneys at his firm. The message was brief and coldly professional, informing me that my parents were challenging the will on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. Attached was a settlement offer. I would receive a cash payment of $300,000 in exchange for relinquishing all claims to the property. I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my modest apartment. Outside, Boston continued its normal rhythms, people rushing home from work, unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. The Cape House represented more than just real estate. It was the physical embodiment of the only family relationship where I'd felt truly accepted. My phone rang. It was Wellington himself. Ms. Mitchell, have you had time to review our offer? His voice was smooth, practiced. I have, I replied. And I'm declining. The house was Grandma Ruth's to give, and she chose to give it to me. He chuckled, the sound entirely without humor. I understand your position, but I should warn you that fighting this will be unpleasant. Richard and Eleanor are prepared to disclose some rather unflattering details about your relationship with Ruth. It might be better for everyone if this remains a private family matter. The threat was thinly veiled, but effective. Still, something inside me hardened rather than crumbled. Mr. Wellington, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice, I'll see you in court. Thomas Wellington wasn't just any attorney. He was my father's protege and rumored successor at the firm. His specialty was aggressive litigation, and he had a reputation for finding or creating weaknesses in opposing parties. That my father had chosen him specifically felt like another twist of the knife. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. My cousin Marcus called to check in, his concern transparently disguising his real message. The family is really upset, Cass, he said. Aunt Eleanor was crying at Sunday dinner. Is this house really worth tearing everyone apart? Then came my Uncle Stephen's email. Your grandmother wouldn't want this kind of conflict. You know how she valued family harmony. The irony wasn't lost on me. Suddenly everyone was an expert on what Grandma Ruth would have wanted, despite barely visiting her in her final years. Most painful was the late-night call from Stephanie. Unlike the others, she didn't immediately launch into persuasion. How are you holding up? She asked, and the genuine concern in her voice nearly broke my composure. I've been better, I admitted. How bad is it at home? She sighed. Dad's on the warpath. I've never seen him this angry, not even when that junior partner lost the Westridge account. She paused. Cass, I'm not saying you should give in, but they're prepared to go nuclear on this. What does that mean exactly? They're building a case that you isolated Ruth from the family, that you poisoned her against them. Wellington has been interviewing the household staff, the neighbors, anyone who might have seen you with her. My stomach dropped. That's ridiculous. I visited her because I loved her. Because we connected. I know that, Stephanie said softly. But Wellington doesn't need the truth. He just needs a narrative that sounds plausible to a judge. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment, weighing my options. I could take the settlement. $300,000 was a significant amount of money, enough for a down payment on a place of my own. The alternative was a protracted legal battle against one of Boston's most formidable attorneys, with my family's private business dragged into public view. The practical choice was obvious, but something in me refused to bend. The next morning, I made a decision. I would represent myself. It was risky, perhaps even foolhardy, but I knew family law. I understood probate cases. And most importantly, I knew the truth about my relationship with Grandma Ruth. I requested personal leave from work, explaining the situation to my boss, Patricia Goldstein. You're going up against Thomas Wellington? Pro SE. She removed her reading glasses, fixing me with a concerned stare. Cassandra, I admire your courage, but that man is a shark. I know the risks, I assured her. But this is something I need to do. Take whatever time you need, she said finally. Just be careful. I transformed my small living room into a war room. Case law books piled on the coffee table. Yellow legal pads filled with notes covered my sofa. I requested and received copies of all documentation related to Grandma Ruth's estate planning from Mr. Abernathy. What I discovered was a goldmine. Grandma hadn't just updated her will on a whim. She'd undergone a complete cognitive assessment 3 weeks before making the changes. Her physician, Dr. Landon, had documented her excellent mental acuity and clear decision-making capacity. There were also detailed notes from her sessions with Mr. Abernathy, where she explicitly outlined her reasons for leaving the Cape House to me. Most valuable was a video recording, standard practice at Abernathy's firm for elderly clients making significant changes to their estate plans. In it, Grandma Ruth spoke lucidly and passionately about her decision. I'm leaving the Cape House to Cassandra because she's the only one who truly appreciates what it represents, she said, her blue eyes clear and focused. Richard and Eleanor have their Boston home and their place in the Berkshires. Stephanie has never shown interest in the Cape. Cassandra is the one who visits regularly, who loves this place as I do. Watching the recording, tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma Ruth was advocating for me. The breakthrough came when I discovered her personal journal in a box of documents Mr. Abernathy had provided. The leather-bound book contained entries spanning the last 5 years of her life. Many mentioned our visits together, our conversations, her growing concerns about my parents' treatment of me. One entry in particular stood out. Richard called today, asking again about my estate planning. He seems fixated on the Cape property, mentioning how they could modernize it. The thought of this place being gutted for one of Eleanor's showcase homes breaks my heart. This house has soul. Cassandra understands that. When she visits, she notices the details, the worn spot on the porch swing, the collection of shells we've gathered over decades, the way the light hits the bay window at sunset. She belongs here in a way Richard and Eleanor never will. The journal was a window into Grandma's thinking, concrete evidence that her decision had been deliberate and thoughtful. 2 weeks before the court date, Wellington requested a final settlement meeting. I agreed, hoping to gauge his strategy. We met at a conference room in the courthouse. Wellington arrived with 2 junior associates and a stack of folders. My parents chose not to attend. Ms. Mitchell, he began, his tone condescending, I've reviewed your documentation, and while I appreciate your enthusiasm, I must advise you that proceeding with this case is unwise. I maintained eye contact, saying nothing. We have testimony from Ruth's housekeeper that you visited frequently in the months before she changed her will, often alone with her for hours. We have records showing you drove her to appointments without family knowledge. These facts, presented in the right context, could appear quite damaging. They could, I agreed. Or they could demonstrate that I was the only family member who made time for her. His smile tightened. We also have medical records indicating Ruth was prescribed pain medication that has been known to affect cognitive function. This was news to me, but I didn't let my surprise show. For her arthritis, yes. Medication she'd been on for years, at a stable dosage, and which Dr. Landon confirmed did not impair her faculties. Wellington's eyes narrowed slightly. You're making a mistake going up against me, little girl. I've been practicing law since before you entered kindergarten. The diminutive term ignited something in me. Mr. Wellington, my grandmother taught me that the law doesn't belong exclusively to men in expensive suits. I'll see you in court. As I gathered my materials to leave, he delivered his parting shot. Your parents wanted me to convey a message. If you proceed with this case, they will consider all family ties permanently severed. Are you prepared for that consequence? I paused at the door. Please tell them I received their message. and that Grandma Ruth would be deeply disappointed in their tactics. 3 days after my confrontation with Wellington, I received a call from Patricia Goldstein. Her voice carried the careful neutrality that experienced attorneys use when delivering bad news. "Cassandra, I've received an interesting call from Thomas Wellington." She paused. "He suggested that your involvement in a case against your own parents represents a conflict of interest for our firm, given that your father's practice occasionally refers clients to us." My heart sank. This was a new angle of attack, threatening my professional standing. "That's a stretch, Patricia. My family law work has nothing to do with my father's corporate practice." "I agree," she said. "And I told Wellington as much. But I wanted you to be aware they're exploring every possible avenue of pressure." She hesitated. "Cassandra, I support your right to fight this battle, but I need to ask, is it worth it? The Cape House is valuable, certainly, but at what cost?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself daily. "It's not just about the property," I explained. "It's about honoring Grandma Ruth's wishes. It's about standing up to bullying tactics. If I back down now, I'll be confirming everything they've always believed about me, that I'm too weak, too emotional to stand my ground." After we hung up, I stared at the case files spread across my dining table, wondering if I'd underestimated what I was up against. Wellington wasn't just attacking the legal case. He was systematically dismantling my support system. The next afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Megan Donovan had been a year ahead of me in law school, now working at a mid-sized firm specializing in estate law. We'd kept in touch sporadically through professional events. "I heard about your case," she said when I opened the door. "Legal community grapevine. Mind if I come in?" Over coffee, I gave her the abbreviated version of events. "I want to help," she said when I finished. "Megan, I appreciate the offer, but Wellington will come after anyone associated with me. Your firm won't thank you for getting involved." She shrugged. "I've been looking for a reason to take Wellington down a peg. He's burned too many bridges, called in too many favors. People are tired of it." She pulled a flash drive from her bag. "This is research on Wellington's last 5 estate challenges. He has a pattern: intimidation, character assassination, procedural delay tactics. But he also has weaknesses. He tends to overplay his hand with emotional arguments and underestimate female opponents." I stared at the flash drive. "Why are you really doing this?" Her expression softened. 2 years ago, my grandmother was pressured into changing her will by my uncle. I didn't fight it because I was afraid of family conflict. I've regretted it ever since. With Megan's research, I gained valuable insights into Wellington's playbook. We spent evenings strategizing, preparing for every possible angle of attack. Her expertise in estate law complemented my family law background, filling crucial gaps in my knowledge. Then came the break-in. I returned home one evening to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, papers were scattered across the floor, drawers pulled open, furniture displaced. My laptop was untouched, as was my television and jewelry. But case files were clearly disturbed, and Grandma Ruth's journal was missing from my bedside table. The responding officer seemed disinterested. "Probably just kids looking for cash or drugs," he suggested, despite my explanation that nothing of obvious value was taken. "I'd like to file a report," I insisted. "This wasn't random." He sighed, reluctantly taking down details. "Look, without signs of forced entry or valuable items missing, this isn't going to be high priority." After he left, I called Michael Parker, my ex-boyfriend from law school who now worked as an investigator for the district attorney's office. We'd remained friends despite our relationship ending due to career demands, and I trusted his judgment. He arrived within the hour, methodically examining the apartment with much greater care than the officer had shown. "This wasn't kids," he confirmed, pointing to subtle signs I'd missed. The careful way papers had been examined rather than simply tossed, the targeted nature of what was disturbed versus what was left alone. This was someone looking for specific information. "Wellington?" I asked. "Maybe, though it seems risky for someone of his standing." Michael frowned. "More likely hired help. Either way, it suggests you have something they want." "The journal," I said, the loss hitting me anew. Grandma Ruth's journal had entries specifically explaining why she wanted me to have the Cape House. Michael helped me install new locks and a basic security camera system. As he was leaving, he paused at the door. "Cass, I know you well enough to know you won't back down. Just be careful. These people play hardball, and they've got resources you don't." "I'll be careful," I promised. But that night, alone in my secured apartment, doubt crept in. The case was consuming my life. My relationship with my parents, already strained, was now irreparably damaged. My job security felt tenuous. Even my home no longer felt safe. I found myself reaching for my phone, scrolling to my father's number. One call could end this. I could accept the settlement, return to my regular life, perhaps salvage some relationship with my family. My finger hovered over the call button. Then my gaze landed on a framed photograph, Grandma Ruth and me on the porch of the Cape House, her arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. Behind the frame was a letter she'd sent after my law school graduation, one I'd kept all these years. I put down the phone and retrieved the letter instead. "My dearest Cassandra, today I watched you accept your law degree with such pride my heart nearly burst. Your path hasn't been easy. Choosing to follow your own star rarely is. But never forget that true integrity means standing firm when the winds of opposition blow strongest. You have a gift for seeing justice clearly and the courage to fight for it. Those qualities will serve you well, both in law and in life. All my love, Grandma Ruth." Reading her words, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Cape House wasn't just property, it was Grandma Ruth's legacy, her final vote of confidence in me. I wouldn't, surrender it to intimidation tactics. The court date was just 2 days away. I had lost valuable evidence with the journal, but I still had the video recording, the medical assessments, and the detailed notes from Mr. Abernathy. It would have to be enough. That night I barely slept, mentally rehearsing arguments and counter-arguments until dawn broke over the Boston skyline. Win or lose, I was going to face Wellington and my parents with every ounce of strength I possessed. For Grandma Ruth. And for myself. The morning of the court hearing, I woke before my alarm. The late April sunrise cast long shadows across my bedroom as I performed what had become my preparation ritual, 15 minutes of focused breathing, followed by a review of key points I'd committed to memory. My hands shook slightly as I selected my outfit, a charcoal gray suit, conservative but not deferential, with Grandma Ruth's pearl earrings for courage. The courthouse was an imposing granite structure in downtown Boston. I arrived an hour early, using the time to center myself in the quiet of the nearly empty building. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I walked into Courtroom 307, my rolling briefcase making a soft clicking sound against the polished floor tiles. My parents were already seated on the left side of the gallery, impeccably dressed and rigidly composed. My mother's gaze slid over me dismissively before returning to her whispered conversation with my father. When they thought I wasn't looking, they exchanged glances and eye rolls as I organized my materials at the respondents' table. Wellington arrived with theatrical timing, 5 minutes before proceedings began. He was flanked by 2 junior associates carrying matching leather portfolios. His tailored suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. He nodded curtly in my direction before taking his seat at the petitioner's table. "Quite the David and Goliath scenario," he remarked just loudly enough for me to hear. "Shame it won't have the storybook ending." I said nothing, focusing instead on arranging my documents. The courtroom began to fill. A few curious courthouse regulars, a handful of law students observing proceedings, and to my surprise, Megan, who slipped into a back row seat with an encouraging nod. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the room to attention. "All rise. The probate court of Suffolk County is now in session, the Honorable Judge Catherine Harper presiding." Judge Harper was in her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating brown eyes that missed nothing. She was known for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for theatrical tactics. "Be seated," she instructed, reviewing the case file before her. "We're here regarding the matter of Ruth Mitchell's estate, specifically the disposition of real property located at 142 Shoreline Drive, Cape Cod." Petitioners Richard and Eleanor Mitchell are challenging the bequest of said property to responding Cassandra Mitchell on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. She looked up. Mr. Wellington, you're representing the petitioners. Yes, Your Honor. Wellington rose smoothly. And Ms. Mitchell, you're representing yourself. Yes, Your Honor, I answered, keeping my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. Judge Harper's expression remained neutral, though I caught a flicker of something concern, in her eyes. Very well. Mr. Wellington, your opening statement. Wellington moved to the center of the courtroom with practiced ease, buttoning his suit jacket with one fluid motion. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about an elderly woman's vulnerability and a granddaughter who took advantage of it. Ruth Mitchell was 87 years old when she made dramatic, unprecedented changes to her will, disinheriting her only son from valuable property that had been intended for family legacy. He paced slowly, his voice modulating for maximum effect. We will demonstrate that in the months preceding this change, Cassandra Mitchell orchestrated a systematic campaign to isolate Ruth from her family, creating an environment where undue influence could be exerted. We'll present evidence that Ruth was taking medications known to affect cognitive function and judgment, despite her doctor's claims to the contrary. His portrayal of me as a manipulative predator made my stomach clench, but I kept my expression neutral, knowing Judge Harper would be observing my reactions. Furthermore, Wellington continued, we'll show that this bequest represents a radical departure from Ruth's previously expressed wishes and established estate plan. The Mitchell family has a reasonable expectation, backed by years of understanding, that the Cape Cod property would remain available to the entire family, not singled out for one individual who had curry favor in her final months. He concluded with a flourish about restoring the property to its rightful place in the family legacy and returned to his seat with the confidence of someone who considered victory a foregone conclusion. Judge Harper made a few notes before turning to me. Ms. Mitchell, your opening statement. I rose, my heart hammering but my resolve firm. As I moved to the center of the courtroom, I felt rather than saw my parents' dismissive glances. Drawing a deep breath, I began. Your Honor, this case is indeed about Ruth Mitchell's wishes, her clearly expressed, legally documented, cognitively sound wishes. My grandmother updated her will 8 months before her passing, after careful consideration and proper legal counsel. I kept my tone measured, professional. The petitioner's claims of isolation and manipulation are not only unsupported by evidence, but directly contradicted by it. Ruth Mitchell maintained an active social life until her passing. She independently arranged her own appointments, managed her finances, and made decisions about who she wanted to spend time with. Looking directly at the judge, I continued. The suggestion that I somehow orchestrated a campaign to influence her decision is both hurtful and demonstrably false. What the evidence will actually show is a close, long-standing relationship between grandmother and granddaughter, based on shared values and mutual respect. I explained Grandma Ruth's documented cognitive assessments, her videotaped statement of intent, and the consistent testimony from Mr. Abernathy about her clarity of purpose. Finally, Your Honor, I'll demonstrate that this bequest was not a radical departure, but a natural extension of Ruth Mitchell's values and her assessment of who would best honor the spirit of her beloved Cape home. This case isn't about family legacy in the abstract, it's about Ruth Mitchell's right to determine that legacy according to her own judgment. As I returned to my seat, I noticed Judge Harper studying me with what appeared to be reassessment in her expression. Wellington called his first witness, Margaret Simmons, who had worked as Grandma Ruth's housekeeper for the past decade. Under his careful questioning, Miss Simmons confirmed that I had visited frequently in the year before Grandma's death. And during these visits, was Ms. Mitchell ever alone with Ruth? Wellington asked. Yes, quite often. Sometimes for hours in the study with the door closed. Did Ruth receive many other visitors during this period? Not as many. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell would call rather than visit in person. Wellington nodded as though this confirmed his narrative. And did you notice any changes in Ruth's behavior during this period? She seemed influenced by whatever they discussed. Sometimes after Cassandra left, Ruth would seem upset about family matters. When my turn came for cross-examination, I approached carefully. Ms. Simmons, during the years you worked for my grandmother, approximately how often did my parents visit the Cape House? She hesitated. Perhaps 3 or 4 times a year, mainly in summer. And how often did I visit before this last year? Monthly at least. More in summer. You mentioned closed-door meetings in the study. What was in that room? Ruth's legal papers, her journals, her law books. So, a logical place for private conversations about legal matters. I suppose so. You mentioned Ruth sometimes seemed upset after our conversations. Did you ever overhear the content of those discussions? No, not specifically. So you don't know whether I was causing her distress or whether we were discussing already distressing situations. I couldn't say for certain. Wellington's next witness was Dr. Harold Morris, a geriatric specialist who had never treated Grandma Ruth, but who testified about the potential cognitive effects of her arthritis medication. His testimony was technically accurate, but misleading in its generalizations. During cross-examination, I established that Dr. Morris had never examined my grandmother, had not reviewed her specific medical records, and could not speak to her particular cognitive state. I then introduced Dr. Landon's detailed cognitive assessment, conducted specifically to establish Grandma's testamentary capacity. The momentum shifted when Wellington called his surprise witness, Dr. James Fredrickson, who identified himself as Ruth's physician. Dr. Fredrickson, Wellington began, how long did you treat Ruth Mitchell? She was my patient for over 20 years. And in your medical opinion, had she shown signs of cognitive decline in her final years? Dr. Fredrickson nodded gravely. Yes. She exhibited classic signs of early dementia, forgetfulness, confusion about dates, occasional disorientation. This testimony contradicted everything I knew about Grandma Ruth, who had remained sharp until her final days. My mind raced, trying to place this doctor in her medical history. During cross-examination, I asked, Dr. Fredrickson, when was the last time you personally examined my grandmother? He hesitated. I saw her for her annual physical approximately 14 months before her passing. And after that, she chose to switch primary care physicians to Dr. Landon, correct? Who then conducted quarterly examinations, including cognitive assessments. I understand she did change doctors, yes. Dr. Fredrickson, in the 20 years you treated my grandmother, how many home visits did you make to the Cape House? He shifted uncomfortably. None. Ruth always came to my office in Boston. So your observations about her home environment, her daily functioning, her social interactions, these would all be based on what, exactly? Patient reports during office visits. Thank you, doctor. No further questions. When Wellington rested the petitioner's case, I called Mr. Abernathy to the stand. The elderly attorney provided calm, detailed testimony about Grandma Ruth's mental clarity, her specific instructions regarding the will changes, and the measures taken to ensure her testamentary capacity. In your professional opinion, I asked, was Ruth Mitchell acting under undue influence when she modified her will? Absolutely not, he stated firmly. Ruth was one of the most strong-minded individuals I've ever represented. She knew exactly what she wanted and why. For my final evidence, I presented the video recording of Grandma Ruth explaining her decision. The courtroom fell silent as her image appeared on the monitor, straight-backed in her favorite armchair, eyes clear and focused. I'm making this recording to clarify my intentions, she began. I'm leaving my Cape Cod home to my granddaughter Cassandra because she's the only family member who truly appreciates what this place represents. It's not just real estate, it's a home filled with memories and meaning. She went on to explain her reasoning clearly and coherently, even anticipating the family conflict her decision might cause. Richard and Eleanor may contest this, but they have 2 lovely homes already. They've spoken many times about updating this place, which would destroy its character. Cassandra understands that some things shouldn't be modernized out of existence. She'll preserve what matters while making the space her own. When the recording ended, I noticed my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance, I couldn't tell. In my closing argument, I emphasized the legal standards for testamentary capacity and undue influence, demonstrating how the evidence clearly supported Grandma Ruth's right to distribute her property as she saw fit. Wellington's closing was passionate but increasingly desperate. He emphasized family tradition, implied inappropriate influence without concrete evidence, and relied heavily on emotional appeals about family legacy that seemed to fall flat with Judge Harper. "I'll take this under advisement," Judge Harper announced when both sides had concluded. "Court will recess for 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes were the longest of my life. I sat alone at the respondents' table, unable to face the gallery where my parents waited. Wellington huddled with his associates, occasionally casting speculative glances in my direction. When Judge Harper returned, her expression gave nothing away. "I've reviewed the evidence presented and considered arguments from both sides," she began. "The legal standards in cases like this are clear. To invalidate a will provision, the petitioners must demonstrate either lack of testamentary capacity or undue influence exerted upon the testator." She reviewed each claim methodically, weighing the evidence presented. "The petitioners have not met their burden of proof on either claim. The respondent has provided substantial, credible evidence of Ruth Mitchell's cognitive capacity, including medical assessments specifically conducted to establish testamentary capacity. The video testimony is particularly compelling, showing Ruth Mitchell articulating clear, rational reasons for her decision." My heart began to race as I realized where her ruling was heading. Regarding undue influence, the petitioners have offered speculation and circumstantial evidence at best. The respondent's frequent visits to her grandmother, far from suggesting improper influence, appear consistent with a long-standing close relationship. Judge Harper looked directly at me, then at my parents. "It is the finding of this court that Ruth Mitchell was of sound mind when she executed her will and was not under undue influence. The bequest of the Cape Cod property to Cassandra Mitchell is therefore valid and enforceable. The petition to invalidate this provision is denied." The gavel came down with finality. Wellington's face tightened in barely concealed anger. My parents sat motionless, my mother's hand gripping my father's arm with white knuckles. As I gathered my materials, still processing the victory, the bailiff approached. "Ms. Mitchell, Judge Harper would like to see you in chambers." Puzzled, I followed him through a side door into the judge's private office. Judge Harper was removing her robe when I entered. "Ms. Mitchell, please have a seat," she said, gesturing to a chair opposite her desk. "Thank you, Your Honor. May I ask what this is about?" Judge Harper smiled slightly. "Two things. First, I wanted to commend your preparation and presentation. It's not easy to go up against someone like Wellington, particularly in such a personally charged case." "Thank you," I said, surprised by the compliment. "Second," she continued, "I knew your grandmother." My eyes widened. "You did?" "We served together on the Women's Legal Association board in the 1990s. Ruth was a remarkable attorney and an even more remarkable person." Her expression softened. "She spoke about you often, her brilliant granddaughter, who chose public service law over corporate money. She was immensely proud of you." Tears threatened, but I managed to hold them back. "This case was decided strictly on legal merits," Judge Harper clarified. "But I wanted you to know that Ruth's assessment of your character aligns with what I observed in my courtroom today." She reached into her desk drawer and handed me a business card. "If you're ever interested in a judicial clerkship, my door is open. The profession needs more attorneys with your combination of preparation and principle." I clutched the card, momentarily speechless. "Thank you, Your Honor. That means more than I can express." As I left the courthouse, I noticed my parents walking swiftly to their waiting town car, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Stephanie hesitated at the bottom of the steps, glancing back at me with an unreadable expression before joining them. I stood alone on the courthouse steps, legal victory secured, but family relationships in tatters. The April sunshine felt warm on my face as I took a deep breath, realizing this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The courtroom victory left me in a strange emotional limbo, vindicated legally but wounded personally. As I descended the courthouse steps, several reporters from local legal blogs approached, Having caught wind of the David versus Goliath narrative, solo attorney defeats prominent law firm partner. I declined to comment, needing time to process what had happened. The town car carrying my parents and Stephanie pulled away from the curb without a backward glance. The finality of that departure hit me harder than I'd expected. Despite years of strained relations, some childish part of me had still hoped that after the case, after all the legal posturing, there might be some path to reconciliation. Walking back to my car, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Geller, the court clerk who had been present throughout the proceedings. "I don't normally do this," she said, her voice low, "but I wanted to tell you. That took guts, standing up to your family and that Wellington character. Been working these courts 32 years, seen all kinds of family disputes. Most people fold under that kind of pressure." "Thank you," I said, touched by this unexpected support from a stranger. "My mother went through something similar with her brothers over my grandmother's farm in Western Mass," she continued. "Never stood her ground, regretted it the rest of her life." "You did right." Her words stayed with me during the silent drive home. By the time I reached my apartment, emotional exhaustion had set in. I kicked off my heels, changed into comfortable clothes, and fell into a dreamless sleep on my couch. The next morning brought practical reality back into focus. I had a job to return to, cases that had been temporarily assigned to colleagues, a life beyond the all-consuming court battle. I dressed for work with mechanical efficiency, unsure what reception awaited me. The law offices of Goldstein and Baxter were buzzing with activity when I arrived. Heads turned as I walked to my office, conversations pausing momentarily before resuming in hushed tones. News traveled fast in Boston's legal community. Mid-morning, Patricia Goldstein called me into her office. I braced for professional consequences, remembering Wellington's attempts to create problems for me at the firm. "Close the door, Cassandra," she said, her expression unreadable. I complied, taking a seat across from her desk. "So," she began, leaning back in her chair. "Judge Harper." "Yes." Catherine Harper, one of the most respected judges in the probate court system, personally requested you for a judicial clerkship. I blinked in surprise. She mentioned the possibility, but I didn't think. "It's the talk of the courthouse." Apparently, she was quite impressed with your performance. Patricia's stern expression finally cracked into a smile. As was I, when I heard the details. Taking on Thomas Wellington pro se and winning? That's no small feat. Relief flooded through me. "Then you're not upset about the potential conflicts Wellington tried to create?" She waved a dismissive hand. Wellington overplayed his hand. "Your father's firm sends us perhaps 2 referrals a year, hardly the lifeblood of our practice. Besides," she added with a glint in her eye, "we're getting calls from 3 new clients who heard about your case and want similar representation in family estate disputes." "Really? Really? It seems your David and Goliath moment has struck a chord." She leaned forward. "Which brings me to my next point. I'd like to move you to a more senior position handling complex estate disputes alongside your family law caseload. Your handling of the Ruth Mitchell case demonstrated skills we should be utilizing more fully." By lunchtime, my email inbox was filling with messages from colleagues and even a few former classmates who had heard about the case. Most were congratulatory, though a few from my father's professional circles were coolly concerned about my decision to oppose my parents so publicly. The most surprising message came from Evelyn Braddock, editor of the Boston Legal Observer, a blog covering the city's legal developments. "Ms. Mitchell, your recent case has generated significant interest within our readership. We're working on a piece about younger attorneys challenging established practices and would value your perspective. Your victory against Wellington particularly stands out given the personal stakes involved. Please contact me if you're willing to discuss your experience." I deleted the message without responding. While the professional recognition was gratifying, I had no interest in publicly dissecting the painful family dynamics underlying the case. Late afternoon brought another unexpected development. My office phone rang, the receptionist informing me that Judge Harper was on the line. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge began without preamble, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial." "Not at all, Your Honor. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday." Have you had a chance to consider the clerkship opportunity? I'm deeply honored, but I haven't had much time to think it through, I admitted. Understandable. It's been an eventful few days. She paused. I should mention something I didn't share yesterday. Ruth and I were more than professional colleagues. We were friends. We had lunch monthly for years. My throat tightened. I didn't realize. Ruth was very private about her relationships, but she spoke often about you. She was concerned about the rift between you and your parents, but admired your principles. Judge Harper's voice softened slightly. She told me once that you reminded her of herself at your age, willing to choose the harder path when it aligned with your values. Tears pricked at my eyes. Thank you for telling me that. The clerkship offer stands whenever you're ready. In the meantime, I understand you've inherited the Cape House. Ruth loved that place deeply. I know. I'm planning to visit this weekend, first time since she's been gone. After we said goodbye, I sat at my desk, contemplating this new connection to Grandma Ruth. It was as though pieces of her life were continuing to reveal themselves, extending her influence beyond her passing. That evening, I left work early and drove to the Cape House. Traffic was light in the off-season, and twilight was settling as I pulled into the familiar oyster shell driveway. The white clapboard house with its blue shutters stood exactly as I remembered, the weathered porch swing moving gently in the sea breeze. Using the key Mr. Abernathy had provided, I unlocked the front door. The house smelled of lemon polish and old books, Grandma Ruth's signature scent. I moved through the room slowly, turning on lamps against the gathering darkness. Everything was meticulously maintained but unchanged, the collection of seashells arranged on the mantel, the worn Persian rug in the study, the wall of family photographs chronicling decades of Mitchell history. In the kitchen, I found a sealed envelope propped against the cookie jar, my name written in Grandma's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. My darling Cassandra, if you're reading this, then you've prevailed, as I always believed you would. This house is now your sanctuary, as it was mine. Within these walls, I found peace when the world was chaotic, clarity when decisions were difficult, and courage when challenges seemed insurmountable. May it provide the same for you. In the study safe, combination August 17th, 63, your father's birth date, you'll find additional letters and documents I've preserved. Some may help heal old wounds when the time is right. Remember that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. With eternal love and pride. Grandma Ruth. I clutched the letter to my chest, overwhelmed by her foresight, her continued presence in my life even now. Outside the kitchen window, the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing one by one over the darkening ocean. For the first time since the court battle began, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever came next, with my career, with my family, I would face it with the same quiet determination Grandma Ruth had modeled throughout her life. I was her granddaughter, after all. And I had finally proven myself worthy of that legacy. The Monday following my weekend at the Cape brought new energy to my professional life. I returned to the office with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The weight of the court case had lifted, and though the family estrangement remained painful, I'd made peace with the fact that reconciliation would be a long, uncertain process, if it happened at all. Patricia assigned me 3 new estate dispute cases, each involving complex family dynamics. Your experience gives you unique insight, she explained. Clients want someone who understands both the legal and emotional dimensions of these situations. By midweek, I discovered my professional reputation had shifted subtly. Colleagues who had previously viewed me as competent but unremarkable now sought my input on strategic approaches. Junior associates requested to shadow me during client consultations. The Wellington case, as it had become known in legal circles, had established me as someone who could handle high-pressure litigation against formidable opponents. Thursday morning, I arrived to find Jake Levinson, a litigation associate, waiting outside my office. "Cassandra, have you seen this?" he asked, extending his tablet. On the screen was Boston Legal Observer's weekly newsletter. The headline read, "David defeats Goliath. Mitchell versus Mitchell signals changing guard in Boston legal scene." The article described the case in detailed, though not entirely accurate, terms, portraying me as a crusading young attorney standing up to established power. More concerning was the sidebar commentary. Sources close to Wellington suggest the high-profile loss has created tension within Mitchell and Associates, with senior partners questioning Wellington's judgment in pursuing the case so aggressively. "Who sent you this?" I asked, feeling a twinge of guilt about potential repercussions for Wellington despite our adversarial relationship. "It's all over the legal blogs," Jake replied. "Word is that Wellington's due for partner review next month." This couldn't have come at a worse time for him. I handed the tablet back, uncomfortable with how the professional community was feasting on what remained, for me, a deeply personal matter. Later that afternoon, my assistant forwarded a call from a blocked number. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Jeffrey Harrington, managing partner at Caldwell and Frost." I recognized the name immediately. Caldwell and Frost was a prestigious boutique firm specializing in high-net-worth estate planning and disputes. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrington?" "I'll be direct. We've been following your recent case with interest. Your approach was impressive. We're expanding our estate litigation department and looking for attorneys with exactly your combination of skills. Would you be open to discussing opportunities with our firm?" The offer caught me off guard. Caldwell and Frost was well-respected and known for excellent compensation. Under different circumstances, I might have jumped at the opportunity. "I'm flattered by your interest," I replied carefully, "but I'm committed to my current position. We're developing some interesting new directions in family estate work." Harrington was persistent. "At least let me take you to lunch." No commitment, just a conversation about where the field is headed. I agreed to a lunch meeting the following week, out of professional courtesy rather than genuine interest. As I hung up, Megan texted, "Celebration drinks tonight? You've earned it." At a quiet wine bar near the harbor, Megan raised her glass. "To David slaying Goliath." I smiled weakly. I'm not entirely comfortable with that narrative. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about honoring Grandma Ruth's wishes. "I know," Megan conceded. "But you have to admit, there's something satisfying about Wellington getting his comeuppance. That man has bulldozed over too many opposing counsels with intimidation tactics." "I suppose." I sipped my wine thoughtfully. It's strange how everything has shifted so quickly. A month ago, I was questioning my career path, wondering if I was cut out for litigation. Now I'm getting calls from firms I couldn't have gotten an interview with last year. Megan leaned forward. "Speaking of career paths, I've been thinking." The Mitchell case highlighted a real need in the legal market: competent, compassionate representation in family estate disputes. Most firms either lack the estate expertise or the family dynamics understanding. "What are you suggesting?" "Partnership," she said simply. "Not immediately, but as a goal. You handling the litigation side, me the planning and administration. Mitchell and Donovan, specializing in compassionate estate resolution." The idea was intriguing. I'd never seriously considered leaving the security of an established firm for the risks of entrepreneurship. "It's just a thought," Megan added, seeing my hesitation. "Something to consider down the road." The seed planted, I found myself evaluating cases differently over the next few days, noting gaps in how traditional firms approached estate disputes. Perhaps Megan was onto something. Friday afternoon brought another unexpected development. Michael Parker, my investigator friend, called with news. "I followed up on your break-in," he said without preamble. "Called in a favor with a detective buddy." Turns out there was another similar break-in that same week, targeted, nothing valuable taken, just papers disturbed. "Another attorney?" "No, a retired judge, Harold Kensington." "Know him?" The name sounded vaguely familiar. "I think he might have been a colleague of my grandmother's." That's the connection I suspected. The detective mentioned Kensington had some old case files disturbed. Specifically, notes on cases he worked on with Ruth Mitchell back in the 1980s. What would anyone want with 40-year-old case files? That's the question, Michael replied. But it suggests whoever broke into your place wasn't just looking for current evidence for your case. They were looking for something specific connected to your grandmother. The information was puzzling, but left me with more questions than answers. What could possibly be in Grandma Ruth's past that would motivate such actions? Saturday morning, I drove back to the Cape House, this time with purpose rather than emotion guiding me. Following Grandma Ruth's instructions, I located the study safe hidden behind a painting of the Cape Cod shoreline. The combination worked on the first try, and inside I found several file folders neatly labeled and organized. One was simply marked Richard, Personal. Inside were documents dating back decades, including correspondence between Grandma Ruth and my father from his college years through early legal career. The letters revealed a relationship far more complex than I'd realized, a son ambitious to the point of ruthlessness, a mother increasingly concerned about his ethical shortcuts. One letter in particular caught my attention, dated just after my father made partner at his firm. Richard, while I share your pride in this accomplishment, I cannot approve of the methods you described. The law is meant to serve justice, not merely victory. I raised you to understand the difference. There are lines one does not cross, regardless of the stakes. I fear you've forgotten that fundamental principle. Another folder contained detailed financial records and what appeared to be evidence of questionable transactions involving my father's early cases. Without context, I couldn't determine their significance, but Grandma Ruth had preserved them meticulously. The final folder held photographs, family gatherings spanning decades. One showed my father as a young attorney, standing proudly beside Grandma Ruth at what appeared to be a professional event. The resemblance between us was striking, something I'd never noticed before. We had the same determined set to our jaw, the same direct gaze. I carefully replaced the documents, my mind whirling with implications. Had Grandma Ruth preserved these records as insurance? Protection? Or simply to maintain an accurate family history, however uncomfortable? Sunday evening, as I was preparing to return to Boston, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in months. Michael, my ex-boyfriend. I just heard about the case, he said after I answered. Megan filled me in on some details. That took serious courage, Cass. Thanks, I replied, warmed by his support despite our complicated history. How are you really doing with all this? The family situation must be brutal. I sighed, looking out at the ocean from the porch swing. It's strange. Professionally, everything's falling into place in ways I never anticipated. But personally, it's like there's this hole where family should be. Grandma Ruth was my last real connection to the Mitchells. I remember how close you were to her, Michael said softly. She'd be proud of how you handled all this. We talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing more easily than I'd expected. Michael had always been a good listener, one of the qualities that had drawn me to him initially. As a district attorney's investigator, he understood the pressures of legal careers in ways many couldn't. I'm heading to the Cape next weekend for a friend's wedding, he mentioned as we were winding down. Maybe I could stop by? See the famous house I've heard so much about. The invitation hung in the air, laden with possibility. I'd like that, I said finally. The house should meet the man who heard so many stories about it. As I drove back to Boston the following morning, I found myself contemplating the future of the Cape property for the first time. Initially, I'd been so focused on defending Grandma Ruth's wishes that I hadn't truly considered what I wanted to do with the house long term. It was too large for one person, especially given that I lived and worked in Boston. Selling it felt wrong, a betrayal of Grandma Ruth's intent. Keeping it as a weekend retreat was possible, but underutilized its potential. The idea came to me as I crossed the Sagamore Bridge, leaving the Cape behind. What if the house could continue Grandma Ruth's legacy in a more direct way? She had mentored female attorneys throughout her career, offering guidance and support in a field that remained challenging for women. The Cape House, with its multiple bedrooms, spacious common areas, and private beach access, could become a retreat for women in the legal profession, a place for mentorship, renewal, and professional development. I could partner with organizations like the Women's Legal Association that had meant so much to Grandma Ruth. By the time I reached my apartment, the concept had taken clearer shape. I would maintain the property's character while adapting it to serve a new purpose, exactly what Grandma Ruth had specified in her recorded testimony. The victory in court had been just the beginning. The real challenge and opportunity lay in honoring her legacy in a meaningful, living way. 3 months after the court decision, summer had fully arrived in New England. The Cape House transformation was underway, with minimal structural changes but practical updates to accommodate its new purpose. I'd established the Ruth Mitchell Legal Mentorship Foundation, using a portion of my savings to create a program that would bring promising female law students and early career attorneys to the property for weekend retreats focused on professional development, work-life balance, and ethical legal practice. Judge Harper had enthusiastically agreed to serve on the advisory board, along with several other prominent female jurists and attorneys who had known Grandma Ruth. The first retreat was scheduled for September, and applications were already flowing in. Professionally, my trajectory had continued its upward arc. Patricia had promoted me to senior associate with a significant raise. I'd accepted 2 judicial clerkship assignments on a part-time basis, working directly with Judge Harper on complex probate cases while maintaining my practice at Goldstein and Baxter. The partnership idea Megan had proposed was evolving gradually. We'd co-counseled on 3 cases, developing a working relationship that complemented our friendship. We'd begun drafting a business plan, targeting a potential launch the following year if certain benchmarks were met. Yet, despite these positive developments, the family rift remained an open wound. My parents maintained their silence, and I had respected it, focusing instead on building a fulfilling life independent of their approval. The estrangement hurt, but I'd come to accept that reconciliation would happen on its own timeline, if at all. The first breach in the wall came unexpectedly. On a Wednesday afternoon in July, Stephanie called my office line. "Cass?" Her voice sounded hesitant, almost fragile. "Do you have time to talk?" We arranged to meet at a neutral location. A quiet cafe halfway between her Beacon Hill townhouse and my office. When I arrived, she was already seated at a corner table, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Her usual polished appearance was slightly muted, her designer outfit replaced by casual summer wear. "You look good," she offered as I sat down. The newspaper photos didn't do you justice. I'd managed to avoid most press coverage of the case, but apparently Stephanie hadn't. "Thanks for reaching out," I said simply. She fiddled with her water glass. "I've wanted to call for weeks. I just wasn't sure you'd want to hear from any of us. You're my sister, Steph. That hasn't changed." Her eyes met mine, vulnerability replacing her usual confidence. "Hasn't it? After everything that happened. The case was about Grandma Ruth's wishes, not about you and me. But you stood against the family," she said softly. "Dad sees it as the ultimate betrayal." I sighed. I know how Dad sees it. But I wasn't standing against the family, I was standing for Grandma Ruth. There's a difference. Stephanie was quiet for a moment. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing. About family dynamics, expectations. The roles we've all been playing." She hesitated. "I was the good daughter, you were the difficult one. But those labels were never really fair, were they?" "They were simplifications," I acknowledged. "Easier than dealing with the complexity of real people." "Mom and Dad were wrong," she said suddenly, the words rushing out. "About the will, about how they treated you, about so many things. I should have said something years ago, but it was easier to go along, to be the daughter they wanted." Her admission, so unexpected and raw, brought tears to my eyes. "We all did what we thought we had to, Steph. You included." Our conversation lasted for hours, venturing into territory we'd never explored. Her private doubts about the path she'd chosen, my lingering insecurities about measuring up, our shared childhood memories interpreted through very different lenses. For the first time in our adult lives, we spoke as equals rather than competitors or strangers. "Dad won't admit it," she said as we prepared to leave, "but he was impressed by how you handled yourself in court. I overheard him telling his partner that you showed real Mitchell steel." I laughed to spite myself. That might be the closest thing to a compliment he's ever given me. "Give them time," Stephanie advised. "Mom especially. She's more reflective than she lets on." We parted with a genuine hug and plans to meet again the following week. It wasn't complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning, the first tentative step toward a different kind of sibling relationship. True to Stephanie's prediction, 2 weeks later I received a brief email from my mother. "Cassandra, I wonder if you might be available for coffee next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. There are matters I'd like to discuss. Eleanor Mitchell. The formality was pure Eleanor, but the initiative itself was unprecedented. We arranged to meet at a tea room near her regular hair salon, a concession to her comfort that I was happy to make. My mother arrived precisely on time, elegant as always in a summer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She greeted me with a slight nod, her expression composed but not cold. "You look well," she said as we were seated. "The new position agrees with you." "It does," I confirmed, wondering how she knew about my promotion. "Stephanie, most likely." An awkward silence followed, broken when the server brought our tea. My mother took a careful sip before setting down her cup with deliberate precision. "I won't pretend this is easy for me," she began. "Your father and I were blindsided by Ruth's decision, and by her determination to oppose us so publicly." I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. "However," she added, "I've had time to reflect. On Ruth's choices, on our response, on many things." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "I may not agree with how everything transpired, but I can acknowledge that Ruth had the right to dispose of her property as she saw fit." Coming from Eleanor Mitchell, this was tantamount to a full apology. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot. Stephanie tells me you're turning the Cape House into some sort of retreat?" A hint of her old judgment crept into her tone. "A professional development center for women in law," I clarified, honoring Grandma Ruth's legacy of mentorship. Something flickered across my mother's face, surprise, perhaps even approval. "That's actually quite fitting. Ruth would have appreciated that." We spoke carefully around the edges of our conflict, neither of us quite ready to address the deeper wounds. But by the end of our hour together, a tentative bridge had been extended. My mother even inquired about the foundation's needs, offering to connect me with potential donors from her extensive social network. "Your father will take longer," she warned as we prepared to leave. His pride was significantly damaged. "I understand," I said, and I did. Richard Mitchell had built his identity around being the family patriarch, the decision-maker. My challenge to that authority cut deeper than any legal defeat. The days stretched into weeks. Michael visited the Cape House as promised, and our reconnection deepened into something that felt both familiar and entirely new. His steady presence and unwavering support became anchors as I navigated my evolving career and family situation. By late August, the Ruth Mitchell Legal Mentorship Foundation had secured nonprofit status and its first round of funding. Judge Harper had introduced me to several influential women in the judiciary who contributed both financially and through commitments to lead sessions at future retreats. The Cape House itself had been thoughtfully updated, the downstairs reconfigured to accommodate seminars and group discussions, the upstairs bedrooms refreshed while maintaining their original character. Grandma Ruth's study remained largely untouched, preserved as both a tribute to her and a quiet workspace for retreat participants. On Labor Day weekend, I made what had become my regular pilgrimage to the Cape. The first retreat was scheduled for the following weekend, and final preparations were underway. As I walked along the shore path that had been Grandma Ruth's favorite, I carried wildflowers gathered from the property's meadow. The small family cemetery lay at the edge of the estate, overlooking the ocean. Grandma Ruth's grave was marked by a simple granite headstone, elegant in its understatement. I placed the flowers against it, then sat on the nearby bench. "We're almost ready for the first group," I said aloud, having fallen into the habit of these one-sided conversations. 20 women, from first-year law students to mid-career attorneys looking to transition to public interest work. Judge Harper will give the keynote. The ocean breeze rustled through nearby pines, a sound that had always brought Grandma Ruth comfort. "Stephanie's coming to the opening ceremony. Mom's considering it." "Dad, well, that's still complicated." I smiled ruefully. "Some things change quickly, others take time." I told her about the ongoing developments in my career, the potential partnership with Megan, the rekindled relationship with Michael. Through it all, the steady presence of her memory provided a foundation, not a weight of expectation, but a bedrock of support. I understand now why you left the house to me, I said finally. Not just because I appreciated its character, but because you saw potential I hadn't yet recognized in myself. The potential to build something meaningful, to continue your work in my own way. As I walked back to the house, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. Inside, several Foundation volunteers were arranging welcome packages for the upcoming retreat participants. The living room that had once hosted family holidays now buzzed with purposeful activity. Michael arrived that evening with dinner from our favorite local seafood restaurant. We ate on the porch, watching twilight settle over the ocean. You've created something remarkable here, he observed, gesturing toward the house glowing with warm light behind us. In just a few months, you've transformed a family dispute into a force for good. Not just me, I corrected. Judge Harper, the Foundation board, all the volunteers, even Stephanie in her way. It's become a collaborative effort. But it started with you standing your ground, he pointed out. Having the courage to honor your grandmother's wishes despite enormous pressure. Later, as we walked along the moonlit beach, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the shock of Grandma Ruth's passing, through the bitter court battle, to this moment of unexpected peace. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but somehow I'd arrived at a place that felt right, a place where I could honor both my grandmother's legacy and my own authentic self. The house lights glowed in the distance, a beacon of purpose and possibility. In 3 days, it would welcome its first group of women seeking guidance and community in a challenging profession. The thought filled me with a quiet pride that had nothing to do with winning cases or professional accolades. What are you thinking? Michael asked, his hand warm in mine. That sometimes the things we fight hardest for aren't the ones we originally thought we wanted, I replied. I never expected to be running a foundation or mentoring other attorneys at this stage in my career. But now I can't imagine doing anything else. He nodded. Life has a funny way of revealing our true path, often through challenges. As October arrived, bringing the first hint of autumn to the Cape, I received an unexpected letter at my Boston office. The return address was my father's law firm. With trepidation, I opened it to find a brief note. Cassandra, I understand the Ruth Mitchell Legal Mentorship Foundation is holding its opening ceremony this weekend. If the invitation remains open, I would like to attend. Richard Mitchell. The formality was so characteristic of my father that it brought an unexpected smile to my face. I immediately called Stephanie. Did you know about this? I asked without preamble. About what? Dad. He's asked to attend the foundation opening. Her surprised intake of breath confirmed this wasn't her doing. Wow. That's big, Cass. What do you think it means? With Dad? Hard to say. But he doesn't do anything without purpose. I think it might be his way of extending an olive branch. The opening ceremony was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, with Judge Harper delivering the keynote address, followed by a reception on the lawn overlooking the ocean. The weather cooperated beautifully, clear autumn skies, the maples along the driveway beginning to turn gold and crimson, a gentle breeze carrying the salt scent of the sea. I spotted my father as soon as he arrived, standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. He looked older somehow, less imposing than I remembered from the courtroom. My mother stood beside him, elegant as always, but with a tentative expression I'd rarely seen on her face. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the lawn to greet them. Thank you for coming, I said simply. My father nodded stiffly. The property looks well maintained. From him, this constituted effusive praise. I've tried to preserve what matters while adapting it for its new purpose, I replied, deliberately echoing Grandma Ruth's words from the video testimony. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Yes, well, Ruth always did have strong opinions about this place. My mother touched my arm lightly. The foundation is a lovely idea, Cassandra. Very much in keeping with your grandmother's values. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, with Judge Harper delivering a powerful speech about mentorship and the evolving landscape for women in law. Throughout, I was acutely aware of my father sitting in the second row, his expression unreadable but his attention unwavering. Afterward, as guests mingled during the reception, he approached me, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Judge Harper speaks highly of you, he said, his tone carefully neutral. She mentioned you've been clerking on several of her cases. I have, I confirmed. It's been an invaluable experience. He nodded, seeming to search for words, an unusual predicament for a man who made his living through verbal precision. Your handling of the Wellington case was confident, he finally offered. The journal discovery was a strategic error on our part. Coming from Richard Mitchell, this was tantamount to a standing ovation. Thank you, I said simply. He glanced toward the ocean, his profile suddenly reminiscent of Grandma Ruth in a way I'd never noticed before. I haven't been back here since she died. Too many memories. He paused. Some pleasant, some less so. I waited, sensing more to come. Ruth and I disagreed fundamentally about what constituted success in law, he continued. She believed I'd sacrificed principles for prestige. Perhaps she wasn't entirely wrong. Another pause. The firm is changing direction. Less corporate defense, more emphasis on ethical business practices. Wellington's departure opened some opportunities for reassessment. The news surprised me. Wellington's departure hadn't made the legal blogs I followed. That sounds positive, I ventured cautiously. It's overdue, my father admitted. Then, almost reluctantly, your grandmother would have approved. It wasn't a full reconciliation. There were too many years of misunderstanding, too many deeply ingrained patterns to overcome in a single conversation. But it was an acknowledgement of my choices, of Grandma Ruth's wisdom, of the possibility that different paths might still lead to valuable destinations. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the gathering, I found myself standing on the porch steps, looking out at this unlikely assembly, established judges and nervous first-year law students, my reconnected sister and cautiously present parents, colleagues and mentors and friends. All brought together through a chain of events that had begun with one elderly woman's clear-eyed assessment of what truly mattered. I thought of Grandma Ruth's letter, her belief that true strength lay in rising after every fall. The past year had certainly contained its share of falls, but here I stood, professionally fulfilled, personally growing, surrounded by both chosen and biological family in various states of repair and reconciliation. Whatever came next, I would face it with the quiet determination and principled courage Grandma Ruth had modeled throughout her life. The legal battles might change, the personal challenges would evolve, but the foundation she had helped me build, both literally and figuratively, would remain. Have you ever had to stand up for what's right, even when it meant going against people you love? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more real-life journeys through challenges and growth. Hit that notification bell too, so you'll know when I share the next chapter of how this foundation continues to develop. Thank you so much for joining me today. Remember, sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations.